All right, let's start. My name is Chidera.
My name is Diego,
My name is Aaron.
My name is Emilio.
and our presentation is going to cover the Korean War as well as the DMZ. So some questions to consider while viewing our presentation is whether or not the Korean War officially ended and whether or not an escalation could occur between North and South Korea. Right? So for background and the initiation of conflict, after World War II, Korea gained independence from Japan after being a colony for 35 years and was split at the 38th parallel into the Soviet-backed North Korea and US-backed South Korea. In 1948, both zones established their own government, with North Korea adopting communist regime and South Korea adopting a democratic government. Both governments claimed to be the only one of legitimacy in all Korea, causing rising tensions and border clashes. This eventually led to North Korea invading South Korea at the dawn of June 25th, 1950. The invasion was premeditated and unprovoked, despite North Korea's claims that they launched a counterattack as South Korea invaded the North. Okay, so for the international involvement, South Korea was supported by the US, leading the UN forces, and North Korea was supported by China and the Soviet Union. So the US military played a decisive role leading UN forces and carrying out most of the military operations during the war. The US Navy aided in airstrikes, naval bombardments, and transporting resources and troops from the US. The US Navy was crucial during the Incheon landing operation and the Hungin withdrawal operation. The US Air Force inflicted heavy losses on North Korean and Chinese forces through the strategic airstrikes and also executed close air support and operations to aid ground troops. So here's a video of a US soldier describing their experiences in the Korean War.
Now we're going to mark 70 years since the end of the Korean.
This is up hanging on, but Korea was a real shocker. I sat down in a bunk bed, what did I do?
It was after World War II when the country was divided by the US and the Soviet Union at the 38th parallel. The two zones acted as sovereign states until June of 1950 when North Korea invaded the South.
The smell there was awful. There were two trucks loaded with dead GIs. I actually didn't even know what the hell was going on. We had machine gun fire coming at us. You couldn't drink the water. You couldn't bathe in the water. So we actually washed our clothes and our helmets with gasoline.
Back on the road, they headed north, making it further than any other company during the war.
We had airplanes out there, jets that would drop bombs, and sometimes some would go astray. If they landed closer, my tank actually lifted up and about a foot off the ground.
Miraculously, he was never injured.
And we went through all these towns,
relying on the hospitality of locals.
The Korean people fed me and the crew I'm with chicken. It's just crazy. It was can't believe it happened that way. That was almost like being second in command on the tank.
A year into battle, Myers was asked to take command of the tank, but never got the chance. He was headed home.
When I come back, it was oh well, so what? I mean, there was no high five or how you doing.
1.7 million Americans fought in the Korean War, often referred to as the Forgotten War, between World War II and Vietnam. More than 36,000 never made it home.
If you know what battle is and what death is, it's a bad thing. It's just that's all I can say.
Now we're going to mark 70 years since the end.
All right. And for UN support, consisted of 21 countries other than the US, 15 of which deployed combat units and 6 provided medical support. The 5 countries that contributed the most were the US with 1.7 million troops, the UK with 81,000 troops, Canada with almost 27,000 troops, Turkey with 21,000 troops, and Australia with 17,000 troops. The Korean War had many casualties. South Korea suffered 1.3 million casualties, including 415,000 dead. This includes both military personnel as well as civilians. The ally that suffered the most casualties was the US with 136,000 in total. Okay, for China's involvement in the war. So initially, China was hesitant to provide support to North Korea, but after UNC forces repelled the KPA invasion and pushed into North Korea near the Yalu River, China responded by sending approximately 120,000 troops to provide support. Having US soldiers so close to the border made China feel threatened. China's intervention in the Korean War in the late 1950s served as a turning point, preventing the collapse of North Korea and ensuring the war's stalemate. And throughout the entirety of the Korean War, over 2.4 million Chinese troops participated. Right. Despite the Soviet Union's initial denial of their involvement, the consensus among historians is that without Joseph Stalin's approval, North Korea would not have invaded South Korea. US and UN soldiers' involvement prompted the Soviet Union to conceal its participation in order to minimize the risk of escalating the Cold War. And the Soviet Union aided North Korea by providing resources, diplomatic support, strategic and grand tactical planning, military training, and Soviet pilots and aircrafts. And again, to conceal their involvement, the 5,000 Soviet pilots that participated did so under the Chinese and Korean Air Force markings. And finally, here's a video of Dr. Susie Kim describing what the experience of a soldier and civilian in the Korean War would be like.
Here's a portion of a
The war came to
Here's a portion of a recent program.
the war came to a stalemate starting in 1951. You were essentially, trying to take over one hill, and thousands of soldiers are being killed as a result of that one hill. So, and what does it mean to talk about a guerrilla warfare? From a soldier's point of view, I think it means that it's very difficult to tell friend from foe. Given that it was a war, it began as a civil war between the two Koreas, and so from a soldier's point of view, who's coming in as a foreigner into Korea, you can't really tell whether someone's from the north or the south, and that made the fighting very difficult. And in fact, it led to many of the sort of the tragedies that we've heard about. There was one particular story that came out through the Associated Press in 1999. Of civilian massacres in a town called Dogunmi, where basically soldiers were given orders to shoot them all because they could not tell the difference between the refugees and who were enemy combatants. And from the civilians' point of view, you can imagine just how terrifying it would be to try to flee the war front. There was essentially no difference between the war front and the home front. War zones were, going up and down the peninsula, and towns and cities were being taken by the opposing occupation forces multiple times. And basically, depending on what your behavior during that opposing occupation forces were, you would be held responsible essentially for having colluded with the previous regime. But of course, as a civilian, you have essentially no choice. I mean, you have to do what you have to do to survive.
That was a portion of here's a portion.
Okay, now we have some major events and battles. So for our first major event, at this point in the war, the UN and the South Korean forces, they were pushed all the way back in the south, carrying this area called the Pusan Perimeter. And during the Incheon landing, this was an amphibious landing of the US and South Korean forces at the port of Incheon, which was 100 miles behind enemy lines. And this attack was coordinated by General Douglas MacArthur, and he saw an opportunity for a surprise attack, despite the port being heavily defended and affected by bad sea conditions for ships to be able to land. And this ended up as a massive success. It pulled attackers away from the Pusan perimeter, forcing North Korea forces to retreat back up north, which would lead to the recapture of Seoul and eventually the capture of Pyongyang. Next is the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. So in around November, December of 1950, at this point, the UN forces were deep into North Korean territory near the Yalu River, which borders China. And here, around 120,000 Chinese soldiers engaged with the UN troops, whose forces were only around 30,000. General MacArthur believed China was too weak and unwilling to intervene and disregarded intelligence warnings of Chinese troop buildup north of Yalu. This was a nighttime surprise intervention, and the UN troops, they were overwhelmed and encircled, and they fought for 17 days in freezing temperatures. They were pushed back and forced to evacuate at the port of Hungnam. And the Hungnam evacuation is one of the largest military evacuations in US history. The surviving soldiers were called the Chosen Few, and this event was a massive Chinese counteroffensive, which pushed South Korea back, where they would take control of Seoul. Next is the Battle of Kapyong. This was around spring, April 23rd to 25th, 1951. At this point in the war, Seoul was recaptured again by South Korea, and the Spring Chinese Offensive sought to take Seoul for a third time. But the UN forces, they defended the Kapyong Valley, which was a route leading to Seoul. They managed to stall enough time for more UN forces to consolidate and get together. The Chinese Spring Offensive collapsed. As a result, the front line was pushed north toward the 30th parallel, which effectively ended all the big fighting in the war. So starts of peace talks between North and South began. Some important figures about the Korean War. First, we have Kim Il-sung, who was the founder of North Korea. He was also known as the Supreme Leader. He was born in 1912 near Mangyeongdae, which was a neighborhood in Pyongyang. Originally, his name was Kim Sung-ju, and he is the leader of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea since 1948, which is its founding, and he was considered a hero of the insurgency during Japanese occupation. A bit more about him was that he started the Kim family dynasty with Kim Jong-il, his son, and Kim Jong-un, his grandson, who is also the current leader. Ever since his death, he has been regarded as the eternal president of North Korea, and he served as a totalitarian and authoritarian dictator, and he wanted to unify all of Korea under his rule. A bit about his early life was that he joined a communist youth organization in elementary school. He served in a guerrilla resistance against Japan, and he was sent to the Soviet Union for military and political training, where he joined their Communist Party. Next up, we have Mao Zedong, who was the founding father of the People's Republic of China, 1949. He supported North Korea's communist regime under Kim Il-sung, and he saw the US expansion of Korea as imperialism and a threat to China's border. So he ordered Chinese troops to Korea to push back South Korea and the US. He supported the armistice agreement towards the end of the war. Next, we have Syngman Rhee, who was the first president of South Korea, established in 1948. He was born in 1876 in Cheongsang County, which now is a part of North Korea. A bit about him is that he attended Princeton University and was the first Korean to receive a doctorate in the US, so he was very popular in the US. He served as president for 4 terms from 1948 to 1960. He was strongly anti-communist, but he was also a bit of a controversial figure. He had a lot of authoritarian policies. He purged the National Assembly of his political opponents in the Progressive Party and had their leader, Cho Pong-am, executed for treason. He refused to sign the armistice because he wanted all of Korea under his control, and he was eventually accused of election fraud in 1960, where he resigned and was exiled to Hawaii. Next up, we have Harry S. Truman, who was the 33rd president of the United States, and he believed in the domino theory, which was the idea that communism would spread to neighboring countries. So he wanted to contain that. So he sent US troops to aid South Korea. He also believed in this concept called limited war. He wanted to prevent direct war of China and the Soviet Union while also avoiding nuclear warfare. His policies prevented escalation and helped lead to the armistice in 1953, and he left office in 1952 and was succeeded by President Eisenhower. Last, we have Douglas MacArthur, who was a general of the army during the Second World War, but he was appointed commander-in-chief of the United Nations Command in 1950 after the invasion of South Korea. He was a bold and aggressive leader. At the amphibious landing of Incheon, he led it, which turned the tide of war. He pushed North Korea back near the Chinese border, which would provoke retaliation. He wanted to use the atomic bomb against China and create a radiated belt preventing invasion from the north. But in 1951, he was fired by President Truman for insubordination and was replaced by General Matthew Ridgway.
So now we're going to go over the overall outcome of the Korean War. So the major outcome to keep in mind is that an armistice was formed, which is just a formal ceasefire in July 27, 1953. The Korean Armistice Agreement was signed at the Panmunjom, an area within the DMZ, effectively halting the large-scale fighting of the Korean War. And this established the military demarcation line, the MDL. This line became the de facto border between North and South Korea, and it also created the DMZ, which is a part of the MDL, which is a 4 kilometer, 2.5 miles wide buffer zone established on either side of the MDL. And this zone was intended to prevent future outbreaks of hostility between North and South Korea. And this just further continued the division between North and South Korea and divided the Korean Peninsula into two separate nations with vastly different political ideologies. So again, the armistice is a ceasefire. It's not necessarily a peace treaty. And to note the main people who signed and who were absent during the formation of this document, it was signed by the United Nations, who had to represent South Korea, because as stated before, the first president of South Korea was not willing to sign this armistice because he believed further conflict would be able to establish common beliefs and even grounds. And it was also signed by the Chinese people. And again, a lack of a peace treaty due to the failure to negotiate. The failure to negotiate and sign a formal peace treaty. It means that the Korean War technically has never ended. It's not necessarily in a peace of state. And the unresolved status continues to raise the tensions within the area, and both sides have remained in a state of high military readiness for decades. So then some of the outcomes in terms of lives and resources, there was massive casualties. The Korean War resulted in estimated 2.5 to 3 million deaths, including a significant number of civilians on both sides. There's displacement and separations. Millions of Koreans were displaced during the war, leading to a creation of divided families, in many cases who are still divided to this day and have no contact with their missing family members. For economic devastation, the Korean War inflicted catastrophic economic damages, destroying an estimated 40% of industrial facilities and infrastructures in both North and South Korea, with total war damages calculated to roughly be 6.9 billion US dollars. And as for ongoing military spending, due to the armistice and the continued state of tension, there's significant military spending in both North and South Korea, diverting a lot of the resources they make into the military due to the fact that war can occur at any time. So yes, the DMZ is a heavily fortified zone. It is one of the most heavily militarized borders in the world. Both sides maintain a significant military presence along with their respective sides of the zone, with numerous guard posts, fortifications, and landmines. And the JSA, or also known as the Panmunjom, is located within the DMZ, and this is the only place within the DMZ where North and South Korea face to negotiate, have dialogue, and sometimes there's also intense altercations. So as for Korea today, they are two distinct nations, North and South Korea. Over 7 decades since the armistice, North and South Korea have developed into drastically different societies with opposing political systems, economic structures, and cultural norms. The political systems for North Korea, it is a totalitarian dictatorship under the Kim dynasty. And for South Korea, it's a vibrant democracy with a strong capitalism market economy. And as for economic disparity, South Korea ended up becoming a major global economic powerhouse, while North Korea still faces significant economic challenges and international sanctions. So as we can see here, this is just an example of kind of some of the devastations that North Korea is still trying to recover from economically. You can see South Korea down here. The white area is Seoul, the capital of South Korea. You can see it's very there's a lot of electrical infrastructure and it's very powered and whatnot. And as you can see, it's almost as if there's an ocean between the two landforms in this dark area. The light little dot is the capital of North Korea, and the rest of North Korea is quite dark. And this is a satellite image at night. So as you can see, there's just a lot of kind of electrical infrastructure damage that's still trying to be repaired within North Korea, and a lot of hardships they're still dealing with. As for global impact, For a geopolitical hotspot, the Korean Peninsula remains a significant geopolitical hotspot with the potential for conflict having far-reaching international implications. The U.S. military presence within South Korea is still quite present, and there's a lot of funding going into U.S. troops within South Korea because, again, an armistice was formed and conflict can occur at any time. And during the time, this also escalated the Cold War. The Korean War is widely considered a major turning point in the Cold War, transforming it to from a primarily ideological and political struggle into a more direct military confrontation between the superpowers. The whole ideology of kind of communism versus capitalism, which later inspired wars such as the Vietnam War.
Okay, so now I'm gonna compare the Korean DMC versus the Berlin Wall, which is the closest thing that we have in history. So as a recap, for the Korean DMC, it was a border between the North and South Korea, which was also known as the 38th parallel. It was established in 1953 after the Korean War armistice. The purpose was to serve as a military buffer zone to prevent conflict. It was 250 kilometers long or 160 miles. It symbolizes of ongoing tension and Cold War stalemate, and the current status is that it's still active and heavily guarded. Talking about the Berlin Wall, that was located in Berlin, Germany, and then divided the East and West Berlin. It was established in 1961 and it was built by East Germany. The purpose was to stop East Germans from fleeing to the West. It was 155 kilometers long. It symbolized Cold War division and communist repression. And the current status is that it was torn down in 1989 and Germany was reunified in 1990. Okay, so now to wrap up our presentation, we have checkpoint trivia. I have a couple questions for you. So the first question is, who was the first president of South Korea? Was it A, Kim Dae-jung? Was it B, Syngman Rhee? Was it C, Park Chung-hee? Or D, Moon Jae-in? So the answer is B, Syngman Rhee. So next question is, what does the DMC stand for? Is it A, Demilitarized Zone, B, Defense Military Zone, C, Divided Military Zone, or D, Deactivated Mainland Zone? And the answer is A, Demilitarized Zone. So the next question is, when was the DMC established? Was it A, 1945, B, 1950, C, 1953, or D, 1961? The answer is C, 1953. Next question is, how wide is the Korean DMC? Is it A, 2 kilometers, B, 4 kilometers, C, 8 kilometers, or D, 8 kilometers? B, 4 kilometers. What is the name of the village in the DMC where talks between North and South Korea are held? Is it A, Panmunjom, B, Seoul, C, Pyongyang, or D, Gyeongju? And the answer is A, Panmunjom. All right, and to wrap up our presentation, I have a couple of discussion questions. So number one, if the DMC were to be dismantled, what immediate and long-term political, social, and economic challenges and opportunities might arise for the Korean Peninsula? And number two, if the conflict officially ends, how might future educational curricula in both North and South Korea address the history of the war in the DMC in a way that fosters mutual understanding and avoids perpetuating past grievances? And here are references. Thank you.